From Anshei Sphard-Beth Emeth congregation, it's time to take 10 minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of Parshat Lech-Lecha, the purpose of life. Rabbi Menachem Leibtag of Yeshivat Har Tzion identified that really within the Genesis we have a key word, key phrase, which runs through Breshit, Noach, Lech Lecha, and Vayera, which gives us a key into understanding the purpose of life. Begins in the days of Shet, who gave birth to Enosh, and Az Huchal Yikro B'Shem Hashem. He did something about the name of God. What does it mean, Az Huchal Yikro B'Shem Hashem? The Rav Sadia Gaon, over 1,000 years ago, said that there are three basic possibilities that this word, this expression means. Number one, they started calling the name of God. If you look carefully, in the generation of Enosh, they started to name their children, in the other branch of Cain's branch, they started to name them Michiael, Metushael. They started to name their children with God in the name. They started to see children as an expression of God. They started to want to mention God as part of their names. And of course, we do that all the time. Yisrael, Ishmael. These are names that have within them the name of God. When a person has a child, we say, oh, God heard my prayer. He fought with God. Gavriel, God is going to help me be victorious. All kinds of names that have Suriel, all names that have God in them. A beautiful thing. However, it's interesting to note that the Radak says the opposite. He says, when he called his son Enosh, and by that, he called out God's name in this world. By not calling his son Yisrael, something with God in it, that was a way of calling God's name. Why? Because to call your child in the name of God leads to a certain paganism that perhaps this is a child of God, son of God, and all these kinds of things, that somehow we are God. So rather to call a person Enosh, to call a person a mensch, a person, that was really how he distinguished himself and called out in the name of God by saying, God is God, and our children are beautiful, and we thank God for them, but they're not God, they're just people. Second interpretation is that he began to call out God's name in public, whether they made for themselves a mizgad, knesiot, churches and mosques and synagogues, places where you could worship more communally. Third interpretation is that what happened here was negative. It was in the days of Enosh where they not started to call out the name of God, they defiled, not as huchal, hitchil, they started to call out the name of God, but huchal, chulin, they made chol, they made it profane, they profaned the name of God by saying, this stick, this rock, this tree is God, this mountain is God, this star, this sun is God. They profaned the name of God by calling other things in the name of God. So we have these three basic possibilities, which break down into two basic possibilities. Was it positive or negative? Was it something positive to call out the name of God, or was it something negative? Rashbam and Ibn Ezra also say that it was a matter of praying. They started to pray. Rashbam says they started to pray because they had a lot of problems, which leads us to the Netziv in the 19th century, Shadal, a little earlier in Italy, and much earlier, 500 years ago in Italy, the Sforno. They bring together the bad or good interpretation. They say, they started calling out in the name of God. You know why? Because things were so bad. This is a generation when things were so bad that they had to tell people, hey, wait a second. Don't you remember God? There's a God in this world. Don't forget. Rabbi Leibtag points out that the Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel, could be seen as the opposite, the antithesis of this purpose of life, to call out in the name of God. If indeed the generation of Enosh either profaned the name, it ruined this purpose of life to call out in the name of God, or no, it fulfilled this purpose. Maybe for the first time, maybe it restored the notion of calling out in the name of God, praying, establishing places of worship, calling your children after names of God, a positive sense, or whether this was a negative thing that they started to worship God and call it, they started to worship idols and call it God. The Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel, Clearly, the word shame, the name, the idea of name, this leitmotif of names, turns on its head. V'naseh lanu shame. They didn't want to call out in the name of God. They wanted to make themselves a name. It was all about making themselves a name. Now, notice as Americans, perhaps sometimes, unfortunately, as Jews, we sometimes want to make for ourselves a name, make a name for ourselves. You're like, oh, he really made a name for himself. We have that sort of concept. According to this interpretation, it's a bad thing. We're not here to make a name for ourselves. We're here to sanctify God's name. It's hard. As Americans, we're very focused on the individual and our purpose in life. But the purpose is to be an agent for the spreading of the name of God. That should be our name, our legacy, to spread God's name. But what about Avraham? Avraham, as soon as he comes onto the scene, Vayikra b'shem Hashem. He called out in the name of God. And here too, we have to look at the commentaries. What do they say? What did Avraham do when he came to Israel? He built an altar, and then in Ben Beit El, Ben Ai, near the Ai, the second battle site of the Jews in the days of Joshua, near Beit El, the holy city, where Yaakov would pray. And what did he do there? He called out in the name of God. Ibn Ezra says he prayed. The Radak says he told people to come to this altar, and he showed them he told them everything about God. Other interpretations, Shadal says he pronounced the oneness of God. He was a philosopher. He told them about monotheism. Maybe he prayed. Ramban says that the Unkelos, the early translation, says he prayed, but he thinks that he told people about God, says the Ramban. He made it public, and he told them all about the name of God, told them all about God. That's what Avraham's job was, to call out the name of God. We're not chosen to be cloistered and just appreciate God ourselves. We're chosen to spread the word about God to everyone. Ibn Kaspi takes a chance to express some of his radical ideas, and he says, oh, that's the main thing. Avraham understood the main thing, not to bring sacrifices. Not like Noah, who when the ark was finished, the flood was finished, he brought sacrifices. Very nice. But better is Avraham, who called out in the name of God. He understood the purpose of the altar is a place where you can call out in the name of God. That's more important. A makom tefillah, the temple ultimately should be a beit tefillah, as it says in Isaiah, to be a house of prayer for all. The Ralbag, similar to the interpretation we had earlier of the Reb Sadigon in his second possibility, says that maybe he designated this as a holy place. In other words, this is a city near where the Jews will conquer, near Beit El, and he designated these places as holy places in the land of Israel. Avraham several times goes and declares the name of God in different places. So what does it mean to call out the name of God? Does it mean that you start putting God everywhere? You name your children, put the name of God in your children's name, so whenever you call the name of your child, you'll always think about God. The child you see as a reflection of God's grace to you, and you as a prayer that, may God continue to help you and guard you and bless you. Is calling out the name of God to create places centers where you can call out the name of God, or is calling out the name of God simply to pray, to learn how to pray? People had forgotten to pray. Enosh reinstituted it. The Tower of Babel, people forgot how to pray. Avraham reminded people how to pray. But ultimately, calling out the name of God sort of fades into the background. And here I want to add to Rabbi Liebtag's point. In the end, it's not about this key word, this leitmotif of calling the names. Even Rabbi Liebtag points out that Noah's son, his name was Shem, a name, that it's all about calling out the name of God. But even further, one might say that how did Avraham continue to proclaim the name of God? He did it by saving Lot, and it was a public act of saving the whole Middle East there from the northern aggression, and saving Lot in the process, and not taking a dime for his services, and paying those who stayed behind. That is how he spread the name of God. He spread the name of God. He called out the name of God. He fulfilled this purpose of life by being nice to Lot, He couldn't get along with him. Lot was not of ethical character that he was, as Rashi explains. So he said, you know what? Why don't you live somewhere else? Instead of berating him, instead of chastising him. On the contrary, he prays for him, he prays for the world, he prays for Sodom. That's how he called out in the name of God as well. Not just simply prayer and calling on the name literally, spreading the word, but also he spread the word by being exemplar, not only of monotheism, but ethical monotheism, of an exemplar, as Rabbi Chanoch Waxman pointed out, an exemplar of kindness. That's what he's really all about. Ultimately, the prophets see that, of course, this is the purpose of the world. In the end of days, this will have to be fulfilled. As Sefania says, Ki azafoch alamim safabura likro kulam b'shem Hashem. One day I'll call out in the name of all the nations to call in the name of God. In other words, one day, all the nations will call out in the name of God. The Jewish mission will have been accomplished. The purpose of life will have been accomplished. Everyone will be calling out in the name of God. Perhaps it's reflected also in the final words of Yechezkel in his prophecies. He says, one day Jerusalem will be known as a place where Hashem Shama. Jerusalem will be a place that will proclaim the name of God. Mitzion Teitzei Torah, teachings and beautiful lessons will come from Zion. And everyone will understand that Jerusalem is where God rests. And that's where God is, because God is everywhere. And from Jerusalem, that message will go forth. Likro b'shem Hashem, they'll call out that God exists. God is in your life. God is involved with us. He cares about us and loves us. This message will come forth from Jerusalem and the word of God from Zion and Jerusalem. Thank you for joining us here at the Anshei Sphard-Beth Emeth congregation for a discussion, purpose of life. Join us each week for a discussion of the Parsha, how-to videos, and more. And thanks to Jason Lefkowitz, our producer. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein. To learn more, visit asb.org.